Good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Gorell, and thank you for participating in our 1192nd Justice Clearinghouse webinar, Recognizing and Investigating Emerging Firearm Crime. Using trained investigators, the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, NIBIN, ATF E-Trace, and multiple investigative processes, the City of Miami Police Department Crime Gun Intelligence Detail continues to analyze firearms tactics and technology utilized by cross-jurisdictional criminal networks. And during our webinar today, Detective Robert Thompson will discuss firearm crime associated with personally made firearms and machine gun conversion devices. He'll share an overview of what these firearms and devices look like, how they function, and the current trend within the jurisdictions of South Florida. He'll also discuss red flag behaviors concerning PMFs and MCDs to include what to look for and how MPD extracts intelligence from these firearms. Detective Robert Thompson has 15 years of law enforcement experience with the City of Miami Police Department. He is currently assigned to the Miami Police Department Crime Gun Intelligence Detail and tasked with investigating NIBIN-generated ballistic leads and E-Trace investigations. He's a certified firearms specialist, a court-recognized firearms specialist, and task force officer with the ATF Miami Field Division. Now, I did want to let everyone know that today's presentation is done in partnership with Ultra Electronics Forensic Technology. We love partnering with organizations like Ultra, who are so dedicated to growing our profession. And then the last few things I'd like to address with everyone is some basic housekeeping items. First, this event is being recorded and the formal presentation is scheduled to last about 60 minutes. It will be available to everyone through the Ultra website. Second, this is a listen-only event, but you can type in any questions you have through the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we'll take as many of your questions as possible at the end of the formal presentation. Now, I did want to give everyone a heads up that we have a number of videos incorporated into this webinar, and you'll need to be listening through your computer, speakers, or headphones in order to be able to hear the audio. Put another way, if you're connected only through a phone, you may not hear the audio, but just hang in there and we'll catch back up with you at the end. I did want to point out that in the handout section of the toolbar, you'll find 5 PDF documents with additional details that kind of goes into more detail about every aspect of today's presentation. And finally, after today's webinar, there will be a follow-up survey, and we ask that you complete it. Your feedback is shared with our presenters and helps shape everything we do here at Justice Clearinghouse. With that, I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to our instructor for this morning. Detective Thompson, it's all yours.
Thank you very much for the intro, and real quick, thank you to everybody who attended. I got to see the attendee list, and it's pretty inclusive, so I'm glad you're all here. What I'm about to do in the next 50 minutes or so is basically feed you with a fire hose. That's what we call the city way of training down here in Miami. It's a lot of information really quick, but with that said, this presentation was made for you. So if at any moment you feel the need to take a screenshot or a photograph of the screen, please go ahead and do so. Everything in this video, in this presentation, with very few exceptions, is open source, and what is not open source has been cleared for distribution. So with that said, let's push forward. The biggest disclaimer I could tell you is that if you pay any kind of attention to what's currently going on with the ATF and firearms laws, they're rapidly evolving. So everything you see here is current as of March 21st of 2023. However, it's current to my jurisdiction. So obviously, if you're outside of South Florida and some of you are in different countries, you may or may not have laws that are similar or more restrictive. So do your due diligence in staying current with your federal, state, and local firearm laws. Just to give you a quick background as to how the city of Miami is situated, we're roughly 55 square miles, 39 of which are on land, and our normal population is about 400,000 people, but we swell to over 1 million during working hours as well as the summer. The Crime Gun Intelligence Detail that I'm an investigator with was established back in 2019 of September. So before that, we had an intelligence unit that was dealing with firearms, but not to the extent which I'm about to go over. To date, we've inspected 3,753 firearms since 2019. And our average monthly intake when it comes to street recoveries or investigative recoveries is about 110 firearms. I want to start with PMFs, or personally made firearms. I'm sure most of you who are in the United States are familiar by this point with the 2021 rule that came out through the ATF. It was actually finally released in August of 2022. And what it did was help define what a PMF actually is. And then it immediately came under fire in the courts as to why these definitions were being changed. So if you're in the Fifth Circuit, which in the United States would be Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, there's a current injunction. So what happened was the ATF had redefined what readily convertible means. And at one point, you could buy a PMF lower, basically a plastic piece that needed to be drilled out, but you could buy that with the corresponding parts kit, and that was not considered a firearm. Well, we're about to see here in a little bit, the new definition changed that, and now if you buy the non-regulated part in conjunction with a parts kit, it is now considered a firearm and falls under the provisions of the Gun Control Act of 1968. So an injunction was put into place in the Fifth Circuit that said, wait a minute, you're changing the rules too fast, and you're effectively making a lot of law-abiding citizens criminals overnight. So in the Fifth Circuit, there's a temporary injunction that allows business as usual to be conducted, but that's only in the Fifth Circuit. So we're still waiting to see how it's going to pan out for the rest of the country. Essentially, this is what that ruling did. So you see here in the far left, there's a block of aluminum, right? That's an unregulated part. That could be anything at this point. And then you see what starts to resemble a lower receiver for an AR-15. And at this point in this state, it's not considered a firearm as far as the Gun Control Act is concerned. Nothing's been drilled out. Nothing's been indexed. There's no corresponding parts kit. Before this rule, you could buy what you see here outlined in red and the one directly to the right of it with the orange jig kit there and all the tools. Those two parts together before this rule were not considered a firearm. After this rule, however, that became a PMF, right? So that becomes now a firearm regulated under the Gun Control Act of 1968. So that's what we're seeing now, where the rule has changed and all these pieces together now constitute a receiver or the regulated part through the ATF. And of course, that last one there is the finished receiver with all the holes drilled out. It's kind of a crappy picture, I apologize. All the holes are drilled out and that's ready to accept the upper receiver and thus become a final firearm. The biggest thing we had to explain to our patrol guys and all the guys who go out in our search warrants is if you see all these parts right now in our district, it's considered a firearm. Additionally, I don't have to have all the components there for it to be a firearm. So the way the ATF and the Gun Control Act 1968 is formulated is all you need is the frame. The frame is a serialized part. You can have all the other parts missing to the point where it won't go bang, but that is what's actually considered the firearm. A good jumping off point for personally made firearms. This is probably the biggest screen you want to screenshot here. It's going to give you a lot of resources where you can get photographs, information, contacts. You can see the tools they're using. But the biggest takeaway that I got out of this was a YouTube video that I found back in 2021 that is now has 9.7 million views. The title there is in the bottom, How I 3D Printed a Glock to See How Far Homemade Guns Have Come. It's from an outfit called Vice News, and take what you want from Vice News. But it's a pretty good expose as to the amount of skill as well as the culture surrounding these personally made firearms. It should be noted that a PMF is not something you just slap together and in 15 minutes you got a working gun. There's quite a bit that has to be done to make sure, one, that you're building a firearm and not a handheld bomb, which we'll get into in a little bit as to how we got to test fire these things. You really don't know what you have until you pull a trigger as to whether or not it's going to go bang or boom. But this slide here has a lot of really good information if you want to jump off and start looking at stuff on your own. What you see here is the Block 19. This was an actual thing for about 6 months before they got a cease and desist order from both Glock and Lego for obvious reasons. But our PMFs are are mainly around the polymer P80 variant. You can see we only have 19 firearms total since 2019. It's not really a big deal here in South Florida. And the joke I tell people is South Florida is considered a source state when it comes to firearms. So you can accidentally walk out your front door and find a firearm in your pocket. I did it last week. I went to the gun store to buy ammo for our test fire process and had no intention of buying a firearm, and I did before I walked out. So it's really easy to get a gun in South Florida as long as you're not a prohibited person. Additionally, if you have a concealed carry permit, you can buy and walk out the same day, which that's why I believe our PMFs are not as rampant as you say California, Illinois, New York, the areas where it's a little bit harder, if not almost impossible to get a legal firearm. Where there's a will, there's a way, and a market was created, and now you have the influx of all these PMFs. We've received a James Madison Tactical. That's the AR-15 variant of the PMFs. Again, essentially, these are sold as a plastic hull that requires some drilling and some milling before it can be finalized into your a firearm. And then we have what I call other, and they're not traditional PMFs in the sense of they had to be drilled out and milled and put together in a certain fashion. These are what I call Frankenstein guns, and what we see a lot of here, and we don't know exactly why this is happening. I can only imagine it's happening because they're trying to circumvent tracing, which it's not. Is we'll see, for instance, a Glock lower mated with another Glock upper that have two different serial numbers. Now, I said earlier the serialized part that the ATF is concerned about when it comes to tracing is the lower receiver, or in this case, the frame of this Glock. However, because Glock sells firearms in multiple countries, those rules aren't always the same. And some countries require every part of the firearm to be serialized, which is why on Glocks you see the serial both on the frame and the barrel, as well as the slide. So what we started doing is when we trace these guns, we trace the frame as recovered, and then we trace the slide as unrecovered. And that still allows me to identify the purchaser of both components, as well as leave the frame of the slide still available to be recovered and traced accordingly. So in this particular case, we identified that both the lower and the upper were purchased by the same person. This firearm was found in the possession of a juvenile in the city of Miami. And some more digging through trace identified this individual had several firearms that were bouncing back to different gang recoveries and juveniles in possession. And we opened up an investigation through straw purchasing for this guy. Some of our associated crimes with PMFs, we've had a handful of homicides, and the asterisk is there because in this particular case, we not only had 2 PMFs involved in a homicide, but we had 2 machine guns involved in a homicide. In this case, made national news. It started out as a fraud investigation through the FBI, and it'll be a case review here we do in a little bit. And it spawned into a whole machine gun felon in possession case that involved a lot of boots in the ground and kind of unravel this mess. Our felons in possession, we've only had 2 felons in possession of PMFs. So there's this big scare that PMFs essentially can be purchased by a convicted felon, have it mailed right to their house, and then they can drill it and mill it and put it together, and then now that felon has a firearm. I could tell you in South Florida particularly, we don't have that problem because most of our felons who are acquiring firearms are doing so in a manner in which they're either stolen or they're relying on a straw purchaser. 2 of them were recovered in domestic violence incidents, 6 of them were recovered in CCF violations, and again, in staying up with current laws, Florida is going to join the majority of constitutional carry states as of July 1 of this year. It's expected to be signed by our governor. There's a consensus here that it's going to increase our firearm crime, but if you follow the statistics out of Texas and Tennessee, I don't believe that to be true. However, I do suspect we'll see a lot more what I call less informed people carrying firearms, the ones who didn't watch the full YouTube video as to what all their regulations are for carrying a firearm. So that may be an issue. We've had 1 minor in possession, and that was the one I showed you earlier. And then we recovered 4 in a gun buyback. Now the 4 we recovered in a gun buyback, and this is something you might want to pay attention to. We had an individual drive to our gun buyback and provided us 4 fully 3D printed firearms, right? So they fall into the category of PMF and that they were homemade, but they weren't homemade in the sense of they used any kind of commercially available parts. And it got our attention, one, because it showed me that someone within my jurisdiction has the ability to 3D print an entire firearm. And 2, the firearm that was provided defeated the law that requires a certain amount of metal parts to be picked up by a magtrometer. Now, we don't get the opportunity to ask questions in our gun buyback, so they were dropped off and then brought to my attention once the individual left. But again, it was our conclusion that they would at least fire once, and that's all I need to do to cause damage. They were a 22 caliber variant, and again, all fully 3D printed firearms. So this brings me into my first polling question, and I'll let Aaron take over.
Absolutely. That question is open. The question is do you enter your personally made firearm recoveries into the E-Trace database? 4 options here. Yes, every single PMF. Only high profile recoveries. My agency does not submit to E-Trace. Or I didn't know you could enter PMFs into E-Trace. And we'll leave this open for about another 5 seconds or so. We've just got a ton of content for everyone. I want to make sure that we don't compress the time too much here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. I'll share the results. All right, 41% of you indicated that your agency does not submit to E-Trace. 28% each said either yes, every PMF, or I didn't know you can enter PMFs into E-Trace. And 3% indicated only high profile recoveries. Back to you.
All right, so the reason why that's important, so obviously there's no way to trace the PMF as to where it was purchased and how that came into commerce, but the ATF is wanting to get a better sense as to how many of these PMFs are being recovered by law enforcement and under what crime heading. So that's becoming important. Additionally, and we'll see here later on Trace why, when you do have a serial number, why it's important so that you can identify the source of the firearms. And let me take control. Okay, so let's talk about machine gun conversion devices, and this is where the meat of the presentation is. Only because these are highly illegal. They've been illegal for quite some time, and really what the rule here did was help define these items. Prior to this rule, there were a multitude of names for these machine gun conversion devices, and it was causing problems in court as everyone had their own way of saying it, and ATF kind of streamlined the language. And it's been a consensus for quite some time, since about 1934, that machine guns are illegal and they should be illegal. This is the one that most of us are familiar with. This is what appears to be a Glock manufactured Glock switch. It should be noted that when we started seeing these, we thought we had the holy grail of the Glock auto sears, and that we're never going to see this again. And it turns out these are all counterfeit. We actually contacted Glock. Glock made it very well known that they had nothing to do with this. This is not something that they're approving of. And in fact, a lot of them are being sold through Amazon and Wish as parts for airsoft guns. Only we found out that obviously it's not the case. Another thing we're seeing are AR-15 and AR-16 parts being swapped, and all the parts on the left-hand side of the screen are your commercially available AR-15 parts, or for the semi-auto variant, and then everything on the right-hand side of the screen are your AR-16 parts. Now, it should be noted that these AR-16 parts are not against the law to have. In fact, my personal firearms have some installed just because I think that they're a bit more reliable. However, when you start putting in a lot of these parts in conjunction with each other, you have what's called a stacking of tolerances, and you could inadvertently manufacture a machine gun out of an AR-15 and not know it until you're standing next to a law enforcement official and you rip the trigger. So it's one of those things you're really mindful of. The other thing, and this goes back to the training we do here locally, is understanding what the firearm is. So what you're looking at here is a lower receiver of an AR-15, actually of an AR-16. what we try to tell our guys that this part all by itself in this current condition is the firearm. It does not have to go bang to charge somebody with possession. Additionally, you'll see here highlighted in red, that's what we call the felony hole. So we started showing our guys what this looks like, in someone's basement or in their bedroom. This is a machine gun as it stands right here in this photograph. Just the addition of that third hole allows it to accept the commercially available auto sear. There are some exceptions when it comes to machine gun possession, and that is here. So as of my last lookup, which was about 2 months ago, there are currently 182,000 and change transferable machine guns. And what that means is they were grandfathered in prior to 1968. These are not your crime guns. If you're finding a transferable machine gun and you're seeing, most definitely it was stolen. These are highly valuable, pieces that people collect. You're talking upwards anywhere from $25,000 to $115,000 for a transferable machine gun. A lot of our variants are this, right? So we're seeing a lot of them on pistols. Again, there's that counterfeit Glock sear, as well as the parts kit there in the far right. What I'll tell you with the parts kit, and my guys kind of got ahead of themselves, they started finding 1 or 2 of these pieces and started charging the individual with a machine gun possession. And my argument was, well, if they have 1 or 2 pieces, they probably have all 3. And unfortunately, you need all 3 to say it's a viable machine gun. So again, this rule the ATF put out for the MCDs help clarify all this language. I tell people if you ever want to see these things on more video, or if you're searching a offender's social media, these are some of the buzzwords you want to use to see what they're talking about. The biggest ones we see here are chip, and what is not is here is called a giggle switch. Or the play button. So when you're going through your target cell phones and you start seeing language that represents this, most likely they're communicating knowledge that they have of an auto sear or a MCD. This is what we're seeing locally. This was our initial recoveries where we started getting the MCDs in the back of Glocks, and to present date, we recovered 24 of them. But those 24 have wreaked havoc within our NIBIN system here. Just a quick breakdown of what we're seeing, mainly on Glocks, on the 9mm and 40 caliber platforms, and of course the polymer P80s. But the biggest evolution that we started seeing was in January of this year, when these knuckleheads figured out how to 3D print the MCD for the AR-15 platform, and that dramatically increased the number of firearms that can be converted to full auto. So essentially now any AR-15 platform, regardless of the caliber, can be converted into a full auto, and I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. So just some more examples. There's your Liberace one on gold. So here's some evolutions of the ones we're seeing on pistols. And again, this is from ATF literature. It was put out a little while ago. So of course your traditional Glock switch. And then we started very rapidly seeing what's called the Invisi switch, and these caught us off guard in a test fire. And I'll explain how now we do a safety check on every firearm that comes in to verify it's not going to fire full auto on a test fire. There's just a good look at them, and then down here in the right is the 3D printed ones that we're seeing more and more now. And this is a safety check we do. So every semi-automatic firearm that we receive, before we put any live ammunition through it, we lock it open to the rear and we look down through the back plate of the firearm. And if we see that leg, you see my finger pointing at here, if we see this leg, it's indicative that we're about to have a gun go full auto. So we're very careful on how we handle it. I'll show you how we do a field test to verify as well. It's a machine gun. But essentially, what you have to understand is that every semi-auto pistol, regardless of the manufacturer, has the ability to be a machine gun. And in fact, there's a second part to this training that I put on with the ATF, and it's a law enforcement sensitive class, but we show you how to make these and exactly what's occurring within the firearm once one of these devices are installed. So Aaron, if you want to go ahead, this is the next poll question here concerning MCDs.
You bet. And that question is do your agencies have documented procedures specifically for test firing firearms equipped with MCDs? 3 options. My agency does not conduct test fires. We have a general test procedures, but it does not detail MCDs. And we live on a hope and a prayer that nothing will go wrong. And again, we'll give folks about another 5 seconds to submit. All right. Thank you all so much who voted on that one. 58% of you indicated that you have general test procedures, but not specific to MCDs. 36% said that you don't conduct test fires, and 6% indicate on a hope and a prayer. Back to you.
So that was us too, and until we had an out of battery discharge that really got our attention and scared the crap out of everybody on the range. And we'll explain. So what's happening is when we install these MCDs, or when somebody installs these MCDs, what's happening is they're essentially causing the firearm to do something it was never engineered to do, right? So if firearm is a factory as a semi-auto firearm that is now converted with an aftermarket part to be full auto, what's happening is the gun's running so fast and out of spec that you risk having an out of battery discharge. And I'm going to show you in a little bit what that looks like. An out of battery discharge, if you're not familiar, I said earlier, is it a gun or a bomb, right? So a out of battery discharge causes that firearm to be a bomb in your hand, and you could potentially lose your life, your limb, cause a great deal of injury. But at the very least, you're going to destroy your evidence. The reason why we test fire every MCD is because the state attorney here, as well as U.S. attorney here, is very aggressive in charging these machine gun statutes because of the amount of collateral damage that these are causing on our scenes. So the second we identify one, I receive a phone call upon recovery. The very next day, we take it out to a range, we field test, we verify it's going to fire safely, and then we send that video off to the U.S. attorney or state attorney, whoever's prosecuting, immediately, so they can go ahead and bring charges, and in most cases issue a no bond. So this is what that out of battery discharge looks like, and fortunately this has not happened to me. What had happened here was an ATF agent had called me up and says, hey, we have an auto sear, we have an MCD, but we don't have the gun. Can you still test fire? And I said, well, sure. Bring it up to my department. We'll put it on my duty gun. I have a Glock, and we'll see if we can't run, see if we can't get to go full auto. Because at the end of the day, my duty gun isn't the machine gun. It's this little piece that's a machine gun. That's what we're charging. We're charging for this piece. So when they brought this piece to me, I very quickly did the conversion, which takes maybe 10 seconds to do. And I tried to get my firearm to go on battery, and it would not lock shut. And I said, oh, hey guys, we can't shoot this. It's going to cause an out of battery discharge. In fact, I should have a dead trigger right now. And when I pulled the trigger of my duty gun while it was empty, I still had a firing pin engage and fall forward. And I said, whoa, if this were a real gun, it would have exploded in my hand. I'm sorry, if this were a loaded gun, it would have exploded in my hand. I'm really glad we did the safety test. And they said, funny you say that. We actually had the gun, but we thought it was destroyed. They had thought that their bad guy, by some luck of the draw, got shot in his hand, and that the projectile went through his hand into the gun and exploded the gun. I said, send me photographs of the gun, and you can plainly see here all the explosions from inside the magazine well outward. And I said, look, Karma found your bad guy before you did. He put this on his gun. The gun didn't lock in the battery. He pulled the trigger, and he had an out of battery discharge, and the gun exploded. We then verified that the injury to his hand, it wasn't a through and through, it was only an injury to his left palm. So I said, yeah, this is what happened. He tried to shoot the gun, and it exploded in his hand. That's the magazine. So as you can see, it can cause a great deal of damage, at the very least to your evidence, if not to your own life. And in a little bit here, I'm going to show you our test fire procedure. But this is an out of battery discharge. Again, thankfully, it didn't happen to me. For an AR-15, you can see it's even more catastrophic. And this is for your ATI or your American Tactical Import Omni Hybrid, which is that polymer lower. If you have an out of battery discharge with this firearm, it's a massive explosion. So what's happening? So I said earlier, when you cause a semi-auto firearm to go full auto, you're messing with the dwell time, right? So how much time transpires between when the round goes off, the action unlocks, and the the old casing kicks out, the new round comes in. So what happens is on a typical discharge where everything's running correctly, you're going to have a nice center fire strike of your primer. On a out of battery discharge, what you're going to start seeing over time is a mitigation where the firearm's not fully in battery, so your chambers isn't fully locked, and you're going to see a 12 o'clock high strike on your firing pin. So I had a question a while back out of Cleveland. Hey, we don't have ShotSpotter to verify the audio. We only get calls of a shooting. Is there a way to determine that a machine gun was present just through the casings? And my initial assumption was, well, no, because unfortunately MDC does not leave marks on the casing as it's in another part of the gun. And then I started doing research on this and started seeing these 12 o'clock high strikes and realized, oh my, our guns are firing out of battery, but in a way that they're not catastrophic. And I had to get back to them and say, hey, potentially, depending on how the gun's put together, you could see a 12 o'clock high strike on your firing pin, which would indicate that a machine gun was present on that scene despite not having the audio from the ShotSpotter. So just to kind of give you a quick visualization, a quick visual on a semi-auto, on your modern semi-autos, you have this tilt barrel design. So when you lock your Glock to the rear, you'll notice that your barrel tips down, and that's designed to help with the ejecting and extraction, as well as chambering the next round. But when your gun's firing out of battery, that barrel is not fully aligned and locked, so it's tipped down, that's how you're getting that 12 o'clock high strike. All right, so in a little bit, Aaron's going to start pulling up a video on how we do our test fires, and you're going to see how I do a field test to verify it's full auto, and then you'll see the actual live fire demonstration. And this is the video that we immediately send off to the attorney when we're getting ready to charge. Aaron, go ahead and take it away.
You bet. And folks, just as a reminder, if you're connected only through a phone, you won't be able to hear the audio, but the video will go about 1:25. Here we go.
You good? Glock 23 Gen 4, manufacturer United States, 40 caliber, serial number Alpha Echo Lima Romeo 831. Dry fire test. Bang. Gun cycles. New round. Second bang. Same trigger pull. Gun cycles. New round. Third bang. Same trigger pull. Now we go live fire. Rounds loaded. Going hot. Over here again. Alter backplate. Interferes with the sear of the
And back to you, Detective.
Okay. All right. So that's pretty much our entire test fire process when it comes to the MCD. First, we're verifying that everything is in working order. It's in battery. What you heard were those dry fire tests. And what I'm doing is I pull the trigger and I never let go of it. And I cycle the gun very slowly. One, I'm feeling, do I have resistance? Am I getting hung up anywhere? Is the gun locking in the battery? And as it locks in the battery, you hear that secondary click. And that's in this case, another a striker fault. So we do that, one, to verify everything is copacetic, the gun's going to work the way it's going to work. And then even when we test fire, in this case, I loaded 8 rounds. I don't just hook that trigger and hold it and hang on for dear life. I pump it. Part of the reason is because if I do have, say, a squib load or a malfunction, I can't stop it fast enough. So I'm just doing quick pumps to show that, look, I pulled the trigger once and 4 rounds came out. Pulled the trigger once and 3 rounds came out. And that's the idea behind that test fire. The dry fire test is pivotal just to make sure that everything's lining up the way it's supposed to line up. And what I can, one of the things I recommend is, obviously you need some level of training to understand firearm actions and whatnot. That's a whole nother class. So I tell people, identify that gun guy. If you're running test fires, or if you're thinking about running test fires, identify that gun guy within your department or your agency, and make sure that they have it together so that they don't blow their hand off, or at the very least destroy your evidence. Additionally, we do a one-stop shop. So after we shoot this and we send the video off to the state attorney or the U.S. Attorney's office, we'll do a full NIBIN analysis of this gun. We'll figure out what it's been ballistically linked to through NIBIN. We will do a full trace analysis to identify the source of the firearm and if that individual has other trace firearms in their name. And we'll do a whole report showing not only the capability of this firearm being a machine gun, but its historical ballistics through NIBIN, as well as do we have any other firearms associated with the purchaser that may also be machine guns? And I'll show you why that's pivotal here in a little bit. So just to kind of give you an indication of what our machine gun incidents look like on ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter has been an amazing tool for us in identifying where these guns live as well as where they're discharging. You can see it's a pretty hefty incident list since 2019. Our ShotSpotter coverage area is about 14 square miles. And since 2019, we've had 76 events. Now, I said earlier we recovered 24 guns. Obviously, we didn't recover every gun that's discharged, but we've had 76 ShotSpotter events in which a full auto firearm has been identified. Here's our breakdown, and you can see we started out slow, and then all of a sudden we picked up speed, and now we're already at 10 for the year, for this year. This time last year, I believe we were at 4 or 5, and it picked up towards the end last year to 37. So now that we're seeing these devices being available for the AR-15 variant, we can only assume that they're only going to pick up. In fact, I've done several operations with the ATF as of late, and it seems like the only thing we're coming across lately are these MCDs that are 3D printed for the AR-15 platform. And let me see here. So our NIBIN identified MCD research shows that we've, out of the 24 guns we've recovered, all 24 have been linked to something in NIBIN, encompassing 85 different incidents and to include 13 homicides. So they're pretty active. I can tell you that we have a lot of social media surrounding these as well. So when we identify a target, we'll see them playing with it like as a toy. And then very shortly thereafter, through recovery and ballistics, through NIBIN, we can identify what it's been linked to. Here's the thing about straw purchasing. So of the 24 recoveries, we've identified 8 straw purchasers who were also responsible for 110 combined firearms. So, and we'll go over here in a little bit how trace is used to identify that, but it just goes to show just how deep these networks are. And again, we'll go over trace here in a little bit. So just some red flag behavior. So what are we looking for when it comes to machine guns? Initially, on the onslaught of our recoveries, I was having reports of vehicle bailout, subjects who fled on foot, and while they were running, they were field stripping their firearms and throwing it away in pieces like a red herring, trying to get the officer off of the foot chase and onto the gun that fell in front of the school. And it was working for a period of time. And I could not figure out for the life of me why I was having officers give me a frame of a gun or a barrel of a gun. I said, hey, listen, you don't have to field strip these. Just give them to me the way you found them. And I said, no, this is the way I found it. And then as time progressed, we started to realize that these knuckleheads knew that the auto sear was the more important part. They paid a lot of money for that part. And they were field stripping their gun, pocketing the slide, and then throwing everything else away so that they could hang on to that machine gun. Aaron and I were talking about this early on before you guys signed on, the lack of a sighting package. So especially on the Glocks, these auto sears or these MCDs, they cycle so fast and with such explosive force that it blows the rear sight off of the gun. So we started seeing a lot of recoveries of firearms that were transitioned back to semi-auto firearms. But when we put them in the NIBIN, we were seeing that, hey, this links back to a full auto event, according to ShotSpotter. Or we have a homicide that had 86 casings on the scene, and our triage indicated it was all the same gun that discharged. We look at the gun closer and say, okay, well, at this point it's a semi-auto, but look, it's missing the rear sight. It's all lining up. At one point, this was a machine gun. So that's one thing we're noticing of the missing rear sights. Another thing we started seeing were these Ronin stock devices, and this by itself is just a hunk of plastic. It's not a firearm, it's not serialized as such, but once you incorporate your Glock pistol, you now have a shouldered fired machine gun. This was the first instance we started seeing the evolution from the uncontrollable 9mm Glock pistol that was hitting everything but the intended target to this now more controllable shoulder fired platform for a Glock a machine gun. And then of course, state of Florida, we don't have ammo restrictions, so we started seeing a lot of these 100-round and 50-round magazines. And we used to joke and say, man, if you load this up and try to shoot somebody with this, it makes the gun weigh like 10, 15 pounds. It's almost unwieldy to hold it with one hand. And then you start incorporating an MCD, and they get light very quickly. So we started telling our guys, look, if you start seeing a combination of this stuff on your traffic stops and vehicles, search a little bit harder. You're probably going to come across the MCD that's hiding in plain sight, because these guys have so far felt comfortable with putting them in their pockets, hanging them on keychains, hiding them in plain sight, because law enforcement wasn't ready to accept the fact that that little part all by itself is the regulated machine gun. And again, this is that test fire gun you saw. So now we tell our guys, upon every recovery of every semi-auto firearm, lock it to the rear, flip it over, look underneath, and if you see this leg hanging out, that's an indication that you have a machine gun. And of course here, again, another evolution. We had an FFL as a side business. One of our gun dealers here in South Florida was selling these things, and of course the ATF got involved and shut it down. Here's another thing that's new, are these 3D printers, right? So again, by themselves, they're kind of innocuous. They're not against the law to have, but you can see for a relatively low investment, $100, you could buy one of these and start 3D printing these MCD devices. So again, we tell our guys, if you're serving a warrant and you're seeing these in the house, it could be a guy who's making trinkets for his kids, or it could be a guy who's got a side business making these MCDs. Pictured here is the Ghost Gunner, and this is made by Cody Wilson, who I showed at the beginning of all this. And the Ghost Gunner is a CNC machine that has the ability to essentially carve out, a lower receiver for a firearm. So here's what it looks like. But if that's missing and all you see are all these metal shavings around someone's garage or house or in their car, all over their clothing, it could be indicative that they are potentially running an illegal PMF or MCD operation. These were put in as handouts. So these are all the flyers that we've conducted since we started as a unit, just identifying what these devices are, what to look out for, how we came in contact with them, and then the appropriate statutes for both federal and state for Florida. And in a little bit, we're going to go over the Swift link seen here, as well as the lightning links. I'm going to let Aaron take it over here in a little bit. Again, just to show it's not just Glocks anymore, right? There's a huge evolution, and now essentially any semi-auto pistol can be converted into a full auto firearm. Okay, so part of my job apparently has become to be the inbox of every video that's a machine gun and every suspected PMF and every suspected MCD, and I get videos like this all day long from all across the country. We do evaluations, we say yay or nay, and we give opinions now as to, yes, it's a machine gun, here's how I know. Obviously, if you have a good recovery, then I'll do a full report for you. But yeah, it's just, again, illustrating that it's not just Glocks anymore and that you need to be looking at everything that comes in. This was just put out a little while ago out of Texas. Again, this is the Gersan knockoff of the Beretta. I haven't had the chance to hold this physically and see exactly how they did it, but they're talking about this little piece here highlighted in red If you see that on the firearms, it's indicative of it being full auto. That was just put out right before the end of last year. And again, right, so more evolutions. They come in all shapes and sizes. They're 3D printed now. The one down here on the lower right, we had received, and everyone was really excited. It's going to be machine gun, but if you notice, it's missing the leg, right? It used to be right about there on the lower portion of your screen, and it's sheared off. It's a 3D printed piece of junk that was a piece of plastic rubbing against a piece of metal inside the gun, and it chewed itself off. So at that point, we couldn't charge the machine gun. I did encourage them to go through social media and see if they can't find it when it was still functioning. But it put us on to the individual of a 3D print operation, and now he's being tracked. And again, there's that parts kit I explained earlier. So black market retail for these things, from our best intelligence gathering, they're going from $350 to $600. I could tell you that they're moving, our targets are moving away from the handgun variants and switching over to the AR-15 variant. And that's as of January of this year, and things are getting out of control. So I'll show you what this looks like now. Real quick, there's another trend we're seeing of these binary triggers. So to the left is the traditional Glock 18, and to the right is the Franklin Armory's binary trigger system. The one on the left, this is the holy grail of Glocks, right? So if you find a Glock 18C, these are typically heavily controlled. They're not importable into the United States unless you have an SOT license, and it is in fact an NFA item. The one on the right, however, is legal to own, and it's a binary trigger, which means it's a bang on a trigger pull and then a bang on a trigger release. So you can already start to visualize the problems that most firearms guys have with this. It's available now, and there's a short video that Aaron's going to pull up here just showing how it operates.
You can give it the real gas. So best way to do this, come full on the trigger and then full off. Okay. Let's give her a rip. That was only 10 rounds.
That was 10 rounds in about a second and a half.
I apologize for the orientation on that. Yeah, kind of tilt your head a little bit. But yeah, so essentially it's a bang on a trigger and a bang on a release. They're available for a wide range of firearms, but you can see how it looks very similar to the Glock 18C. The field test for this is when you pull the trigger, it's going to force itself into a reset, and you'll know almost immediately that it's a binary trigger. Plus, you'll see all the markings on it. We haven't seen these locally outside of trade shows, mainly because of the price. I mean, it's $900 just for that top piece. They don't give you the whole gun. It's you know, just for that slide is $900. Our knuckleheads would much rather 3D print them for a lot cheaper than that. All right, so let's move into the AR-15s. We're almost done, guys. So again, this goes back to that felony hole I explained earlier. So if we have a lower receiver of a AR-15 with that third hole drilled into it, that all by itself is a machine gun. I need nothing else, just that. And then you can see the accompanying sear and how it sits inside the gun there. Then you have your aftermarket stuff, right? So this is your lightning link. They require a bit more modification to work. You don't just drop them in and the gun runs freely, which may be the reason why we're not seeing these, because it does require some level of intelligence and gunsmithing. But if you go to Google right now and type in lightning link, the first photograph that pops up is this, and it is the 3D, it's a 3D printed or the CAD plans to go ahead and start making these things right now. We had an individual, I'm sure you've all heard of Florida Man. Florida Man is pretty active when it comes to the legal system. And we had an individual here who was selling these as bottle openers or keychains. You can see there he's getting ready to sell out $99 a piece. Of course, the ATF got wind of this and shut him down and put him in jail. But they're everywhere. I have another presentation where there's just boxes and boxes full of these things in plain sight. No one knew what they were until someone like me walked in and went, these are all machine guns. This is a Swift Link. This is the variant that we are seeing on a rather regular basis down here in South Florida, and we're in multiple operations right now at the ATF of getting ready to shut down. But they're a little bit more robust than the Lightning Link. They're a lot easier to install. They are a drop-in part. They do require a M16 bolt carrier group to make them work, and I'll show you what it looks like in a little bit. There's a couple different variants, right? So the top left is your 3D printed, and then you have your CNC steel or aluminum. The 3D printed ones are lasting roughly 200 to 300 rounds. If we have a breakdown, they have to go buy a new one. And then, of course, they can make them out of a coat hanger, right? So where there's a will, there's a way. All these knuckleheads talk, and there's always somebody within their group who knows just enough to be a bit more dangerous than the next guy. And then, of course, you have these on Etsy, right? So for limited time, and if you have $99, Etsy was selling these as of a month ago. And of course, they were described as a stainless steel coat hanger hook. I think that's a little over engineered for its purpose, but that in fact is a Swift link. So this is an M16 bolt carrier group I was telling you. This is what's required to run in conjunction with that Swift link. And all by itself, installed in a traditional AR-15, it will not run the AR-15 as a M16, right? So it won't go full auto by itself. In fact, every AR-15 that I own, this is the bolt carrier group that I run. It's a bit more robust. It functions a little bit better. It weighs more. Obviously costs a little bit more. But this, in conjunction with that part, makes the firearm run full auto. All that said, again, if all you find is that Swift link in their pocket, that is the machine gun and can be charged as such through the federal court system. This is one of our recoveries recently that had the Swift link in it. And the problem with the Swift link, unlike the Glocks, is traditionally you can see on the handgun variant that it has an MCD attached, right? So either it's that big bulky box in the back end plate, or you can flip it over and really quickly see, oh, there's a leg sticking out. For the AR-15 variant, there is no external indication that a MCD exists. What you're going to have to do is push out that rear takedown pin, look down in the lower receiver, and you'll see the part right there hanging out. That is the machine gun all by itself. Your capture point is that takedown pin, it holds it in place, and what it's doing is it's pressing down on that disconnector, allowing the rifle to run in a full auto capacity. The one we have is starting to break down. As I said earlier, they run about 200 to 300 rounds before you have a malfunction. We did test fire it. We were finally able to get it to go full auto. And that's how it lies in the gun. If you have, if you cracked it open and looked at it on a side profile, that's the machine gun part. And this is just another view of it. Again, it can be any color. In some cases, when you crack open the rifle and go to look down, you go, oh, there's no MCD here. Occasionally it gets stuck up in the lug. As you see here on the right-hand side, but that piece should not be in there. And again, all by itself, that's the machine gun. Here's the issue I have with the AR-15 variant is when we had the handguns, it was 9 and 40 calibers, right? So yes, you're going to have collateral damage. The rounds, however, won't go as far. They won't penetrate as much. You could, depending on where you're hit, you can probably survive that wound. Well, now we start talking about the AR-15, and now I swap out the barrel, and I can go with 300 Blackout, 6.5 Grendel, 6.5 Creedmoor, 308. Those rounds are much more devastating on soft tissue, to the fact of you can actually lose a limb if you're hit with a 308. They're most likely not survivable injuries, and your collateral damage can be much further downrange with these ammo. So just keep that in mind, that we're not dealing with little pea shooters anymore. We're dealing with some serious weapons that have some serious capabilities. And this is why the ATF locally and why the city of Miami and the county in general have really taken the heart going after these machine guns and these manufacturers, because this is what we're looking at now in terms of ammo. In a little bit, Aaron's going to pull up one of our incidents that were captured on video. This is out of a pretty popular club we have down here in our north end. And you're going to see just how fast one of these Swift links installed into an AR-15 can drop 26 rounds. Go ahead, Aaron. Okay. So yeah, in about we counted down the total shooting on that, and we believe it was something in the area of 6 seconds for that whole shooting incident to happen. The video ran a little longer. It was 6 seconds, and in 6 seconds, 26 rounds were released from that AR-15. So it doesn't take a whole lot of time to do a whole lot of damage. This is we haven't recovered this gun yet, but our latest intel suggests this is what they put in it. This again, that 3D printed Swift link. So you know what, Aaron, we're going to go ahead and skip some of the poll questions because we are running a little tight on time. But I'm sure the reason why you're here is because you're seeing MCDs, and if you haven't, then you need to start go checking your guns in your evidence locker just to verify that you didn't potentially miss one if you're not test firing these things. The last thing I'll go over for the MCDs are the rare breed triggers. This was under the ATF rule that came out, and ATF has deemed that these by themselves are also machine guns. There's been a program in place to go out and recover these. And essentially what's happening here is just like the binary trigger or like the binary trigger, you have a bang on a trigger pull, but unlike the binary trigger where you have to physically release it to get that second bang, this trigger pack is forcing that reset to happen. So you're getting a bang on a trigger pull. The mechanism within the trigger pack is forcing that gun back in the reset and forcing that second round to come out whether you wanted to or not. And then if you're still applying reverb pressure, that sequence begins all over again. So it's as they're used, it's still one shot, one pull, and then a release, another shot. But if you're as long as you're applying pressure to that trigger, it'll function as a full auto gun. And then again, it's manufactured in a really similar way as the traditional drop-in auto sear that I showed you on the first bit of slides. So, Aaron, we're going to skip. Yeah, you can go ahead and play it. So Aaron's going to play a video, and it's going to show the full auto and rare breed trigger side by side. So you can see right away, both guns side by side function relatively the same. And in fact, if you were to watch that whole video, the shooter in that video says, you know what, this trigger pack actually shoots faster than the factory made M16 variant. So it's actually a bit more efficient. So the ATF has deemed it to be a machine gun and has since started collection efforts. So I really quick just want to go over how we investigate this stuff. So obviously we're using NIBIN, and NIBIN gives us our ballistic history of these firearms. We're using E-Trace to identify the source of the firearm as well as source of any other firearm that's tied to the purchaser. We spent a lot of time looking at TLO, establishing relationships, criminal histories. We love going through cell phones with warrants and getting all the knowledge we need when it comes to proving to a judge that our target was aware they had a machine gun. ShotSpotter helps us to identify where these guns live. Of course, David is our ID program down here, how we identify who lives at certain addresses and if they're problem children or not. And then we coordinate all of our efforts to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the ATF, and through HIDA down here in South Florida. One of our biggest cases I mentioned earlier was our individual who's being looked at by the FBI through fraud. And when they served the warrant, they uncovered seven firearms, two of which were, we're going to skip this question for now. Two of which were PMFs and two of which were full auto. When we did our NIBIN analysis in this, we started to realize that all his machine guns actually played a role in several other of our machine gun discharges that we have yet to recover. So we were able to use intelligence through him to find some more of these guns, establish gun relationships, and help close some of these homicides that he was attributed to. The other thing we identified was his straw purchasers, and you'll start to see here on your right-hand side of the screen, these individuals were identified, and we found more firearms that had more NIBIN leads, and this spiraled out of control really quick to the point where it showed us that this was being ignored for a good deal of time, and that we were finally able to get some reins on it and kind of reel it in, identify who our players were, and it established what we call a VIP program or violent impact player, which we'll go over here in a second. This is what we're looking for on traces, right? So the first thing I want to see here is time to crime. How much time transpired between when the gun was purchased and when it was recovered? who purchased the firearm compared to who possessed the firearm upon recovery, the type of firearm it was, where the firearm was purchased at, and then of course this is stuff I add towards the end if it was a machine gun or a gang association, felon in possession. And then the big thing gets my attention as well is, do they have a concealed carry permit, which in the state of Florida means I can buy a gun and walk out with it today with no wait list constraints. So when we start looking at this, we start realizing really quickly that I have a female, and her DOB has been erased here, but really close in age to our subject. Time of crime is really short. It's a Glock. We start looking at her a little deeper and realize, hey, she's got several of the same pistol purchased from the same dealer, always coming back to other people than her, and we identified her as a straw purchaser. So I can pick these guys off one by one, or I can go after their source and knock out 30, 40 guns out of a chain before they ever become our crime guns. The big thing with trace to understand, and this is what my guys get wrapped around the axle on, is that trace will only identify what has been recovered by law enforcement and then subsequently entered into trace. It will not tell me everything you purchased, throughout the history of your life. Additionally, multiple sales will only pick up any gun purchase that was done at the same FFL within 5 days. So if they get smart and they know how to go to different gun dealers and shop around, and they buy 10 guns from 10 dealers in 10 days, those will not be recorded as a multiple sale. Multiple sales are great because it shows me what you have purchased, even if we didn't recover it. That's the only exception where I can see what you purchased without recovery. And even then, it's only limited to pistols. So if you bought 10 rifles, I can't see that. But if you bought 10 pistols, that I can see in a multiple sale. And this is what I just said earlier, so we're good there. So understanding ShotSpotter, and this is pretty much the end here. So what we do with ShotSpotter is I try to identify where these guns live. So I'm looking at special event discharges. So in this case, it was New Year's Eve of 21. About 2 hours prior to about an hour after. And I'm looking at all the discharges, and then I'm reading all the reports associated with these discharges. And if I don't have a victim or property damage, that tells me that the bad guy wasn't taking aim at anybody in particular. He pointed the gun to the air, he ripped the trigger, and was celebrating. So that's a good indication that if I have a NIBIN lead later that links back to any one of these, what I deem to be celebratory gunfire, potentially my gun lives where the ShotSpotter happened on New Year's Eve. And that gives me a good start point for my investigation once the gun becomes involved in something else that's criminal. Additionally, I do this on a almost daily, if not weekly basis on identifying machine guns in our city. So in this particular case, again, I had a New Year's discharge of 10 rounds. Our guys went out there, and unfortunately, because the casings were within the curtilage, there was no recovery of the casings, right? But I had a good indication of this is where that machine gun probably lives. 4 days later, we have a ShotSpotter that occurs on January 4th, 3 houses down from that house where the 10 rounds was discharged. And I said, okay, well, who lives at these 2 houses? And it turns out that we had developed a known gang member, we'll call him Trayshawn, who lived at 5640 Northwest 3rd Avenue, but had family who lived at the first ShotSpotter incident. So I said, okay, this is a guy I want to look at. I pulled up his previous arrests. He had other guns in his custody in his custody before. He was already linked to other NIBIN events, but he was still walking around. We pushed the information out to our neighboring agency in Miami Gardens, who also has a relationship with this guy. And in really short order, 26 days later, we recovered Trayshawn with the machine gun that linked back to the ShotSpotter that I observed on January 4th, and then also linked back to a pretty egregious contact shooting that we had both in December and October of the following year. So it's just really quick how we use ShotSpotter information where we kind of had nothing, ghost town shooting, and we turned it really quick into information that we can use to identify who has this and then put people on them to get him in custody and actually recover that firearm. The last thing I'll say about investigations is collaboration. So if you're familiar with South Florida, there are 35 individual agencies in which we coordinate with. We're really tight-knit. There is no one major agency that kind of does everything. And there's somebody in each one of these agencies you see before you that is sitting in a chair like mine doing like work that I'm doing that I can contact at a moment's notice whenever we have a cross-jurisdictional NIBIN link or a cross-jurisdictional E-Trace event. So this is the last thing I'll say. I started out by saying this, is that firearm crime is quickly evolving. Obviously, these guys have access to YouTube. Fortunately for us, they don't always watch the entire video, and those firearms explode in their hand before they become a problem for us. The industry is also changing, so as definitions become more and more restricted, the industry finds ways around it, and they offer things that probably should never have been created, but where there's a market, there's going to be a product. Machine gun alterations are simple, fast, crude, and very effective. Again, make sure you're doing your safety test before you put live rounds through it. If you are test firing, if you're not test firing, I highly encourage that you do, so you can identify your NIBIN leads. Obviously, watch out for those red flags that I went over earlier. I know I went through them pretty fast, but they're pretty consistent on how we find our machine guns. And again, I said earlier, you can cherry pick your gun possessors off the street one by one, or we can identify through trace where these guns are really coming from and start knocking down the purchasers and getting them disqualified from buying guns ever again. I said earlier, all this is open source, so if I've seen them, they've seen them, and they're probably using them. And of course, the big red liner is never attempt to handle any firearm you're not familiar with. The other one thing I didn't mention earlier was a runaway machine gun. And what could happen there is if you load 20 rounds in a magazine and only want it to go bang once or pull the trigger, it could effectively run the whole magazine empty, even when you let go of the trigger. We haven't had that happen yet, which is why when we test fire, we typically don't load more than 10 rounds. So if it does happen, it's only crazy for a second or two. But we're very cognizant of that, of that possibility. So I apologize for the short nature and the speed in which all this was delivered to you. My information is there. Feel free to use it. I'm available through email and cell phone 24 hours a day. Don't be shy. Any questions, of course, or comments, I'll go ahead and field what I can. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Aaron.
Fantastic. Detective Thompson, you weren't kidding when you said it would be a fire hose of information, but yeah, it's really valuable stuff. It was amazing. Everyone, the good folks at Ultra Electronics Forensic Technology will be sharing a recording of this webinar through their website. I just posted the link in the chat area. It probably will take at least a few days to get it loaded. And we've received a few questions. If we don't get to your question, please do reach out to Detective Thompson. You can see the contact information there. And then I wanted to let everyone know that our next gun crime related webinar is on June 20th when David Kennedy, a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, is with us to discuss understanding homicide and gun violence. Again, that webinar is on June 20th. All right, Detective, if you're ready, I'd love to start working our way through these questions.
Fire away.
Perfect, no pun intended. First question comes from a couple of folks. For the out of battery discharge that you showed the magazine for, how did the magazine blow apart with melted plastic on the outside and the cartridge sticking out of the magazine if it only put a small hole in the side of the pistol frame? Right,
so what ended up happening was, I wasn't there for the discharge. They have recovered that. But the magazine for a Glock is in two parts. You have the metal casing, and then you have the outer polymer. My only summation of that is the round was able to kind of circumvent and then push out the side of the gun. If you notice on that photograph, it wasn't a perfectly circle hole, right? It was kind of elongated, so we call that keyholing, and the round came out flat, so it actually pushed out the side of the gun. And the wound of his hand was relatively the same. It was a keyhole. It wasn't a perfect circle. So I'm guessing that it was more of the projectile itself didn't come out of the gun. It was an explosion caused by the powder within the casing.
Perfect, thank you. All right, next question is from Sandy. She's wondering if you could speculate on what you think the next 3D print firearm trend might be.
I would imagine in really short order, they're going to get away from the polymer 3D print, and they're going to start investing in these ghost gun machines or these CAD machines that have the capability of milling aluminum and steel. Because word is already getting out in the street of when these guys buy these 3D printed ones that are made of polymer, they don't last really long, and they're paying a lot of money for this stuff, and they want something that's going to be a bit more robust. So I'd imagine in short order, they're either going to figure out a compound of polymer that is a bit more robust, or they're going to start making them out of aluminum and steel. When that starts happening, these things could potentially last a lot. I mean, for the lifetime of the gun.
Got it. Okay, great. And our last question goes to Edward. Would the MCD can the MCD be utilized in semi-automatic shotguns as well?
You know, I don't know. I haven't seen any devices for the shotgun. I would imagine maybe for the Saga 12, which kind of runs off the AK-15 platform. I'm sorry, the AK-47 platform. There are some variants that I did not show here for the AK-47 because in order to show them, I have to show you exactly how they're created and installed. It's not an easy thing to do. So that's kind of guarded when it comes to the ATF. But I would imagine if it works for the AK-47, it could work for that particular Saga 12 platform.
Got it. We had another really interesting question from Sherry that just came in. If someone shows up at the hospital with hand injuries, which resulted in the battery discharge, that looks suspicious, will they contact the ATF?
I don't think the hospital, well, the hospital won't contact the ATF, but they most certainly will contact the local agency, at least here in South Florida. If we have any individual show up at a hospital with a perceived gunshot wound, all the hospitals here will contact that jurisdiction's dispatch and say, hey, we have an individual, we have a person here to show with a gunshot wound. And then we'll try and dial back to where it potentially happened. Typically, if it happens outdoors, ShotSpotter will pick it up. If it happens indoors, ShotSpotter obviously won't pick it up. But it's happened, quite a few times where an individual will show up at the hospital with what they think is a gunshot wound, and they immediately call our 911 center.
Fantastic. All right, folks, we're just about out of time. Rob, any closing comments you'd like to share?
So I often get asked a lot what training I recommend to kind of make you a gun guy or to kind of get ahead of this. And I always plug one individual who I have. I get no money out of doing this, but there's a course called Certified Firearm Specialist, and it's basically a really good in-depth overview of all things firearm related in terms of identification, machine guns, PMFs, how to testify in court. It's put on by an individual named Dan O'Kelly. So if you have an opportunity to hit that class or you see it pop up, I highly recommend you take that. Aside from that, any armorer's course you can get yourself into to fully understand the inner workings of these firearms, both how they operate and then some issues to look out for so you don't injure yourself.
Perfect. And Nancy was just asking what the name of the course was. It's the Certified Firearms Specialist course with Dan O'Kelly as the instructor. Did I get that right?
Correct. I believe the organization is called GunLearn.
GunLearn. Okay, folks, I will try to do a quick lookup and see if I can find a link to that training. We'll put it on the resource page tomorrow, and you'll get an email tomorrow morning with a link to that page. I want to again thank Ultra Electronics Forensic Technology for making this webinar possible, as well as the Miami Police Department. And with that, this concludes this morning's Justice Clearinghouse webinar. Take care, everyone, and please stay safe. Bye now.
Thanks again.